You have seen the headlines. China is threatening to cut off the Netherlands, targeting its critical lithography machines with new rare earth export controls. You have heard about the crisis at ASML, the company that makes the machines that make all advanced computer chips. You may have also heard about the Dutch takeover of the Chinese firm Nexperia, which triggered this entire conflict. But today we are not here to retell that story, because that story, the fight between the Netherlands and China, is only the symptom. It is not the disease. The disease is a 30-year industrial dependency, a strategic vulnerability that has been ignored by politicians for decades. And the headlines about ASML only expose a much deeper, more dangerous problem for the United States. If you are like many Americans watching this, especially if you work in farming, trade, or industry, you are probably asking one question. It's the obvious question, a question that seems simple but reveals a painful truth. Why doesn't the U.S. just mine its own rare earths? It's a fair question. America is rich in resources. We have mines in California. We have deposits in Texas and Wyoming. We are a nation built on mining and industry. So why, in the middle of a new tech war, is the U.S. so dependent on China for the most critical materials in the world? Politicians in Washington will give you complicated answers about supply chains and global trade. They will talk about new investments and future plans, but they avoid the real numbers. They avoid the truth because the answer isn't in the mine. The answer is in a single industrial process that America has forgotten and that China has perfected. Today, we are going to do what the politicians won't. We are going to analyze the real numbers. We will expose the three industrial barriers, the three real reasons that are keeping America trapped. This is the story of America's rare earth illusion, the mining illusion. The first myth we must debunk is that the U.S. does not mine rare earths. It does. Right now in San Bernardino County, California, in the high desert, there is a massive operation. It's the Mountain Pass Mine, operated by a company called MP Materials. For years, this mine was the world's largest producer. It went bankrupt in 2015, but now it's back. In 2023, Mountain Pass was the single largest rare earth mining operation in the Western Hemisphere. It produced over 43,000 metric tons of rare earth oxides. That is a 13-fold increase from what it produced in 2017. So, if you are asking, why don't we mine it? The answer is, we do. The problem is not digging. America knows how to dig. We have the machinery. We have the resources. The problem is processing. And this is the dirty secret of Mountain Pass, the part of the story that is often left out. After MP Materials digs up that rock, after they crush it into gravel, after they run it through a complex flotation process to create a rare earth concentrate, what happens next? They put it on a ship. They ship almost all 40,000 metric tons of that rare earth concentrate across the Pacific Ocean, and they send it to China. Read that again. The only large-scale rare earth mine in America is, for now, a feedstock operation for Chinese refineries. The U.S. is acting like a colony, shipping its raw, unprocessed materials to an industrial power, which then turns those materials into high-value products and sells them back to us at a massive profit. This is the illusion. Politicians can stand at the Mountain Pass mine for a photo op and claim American independence. But it's meaningless if the processing is still done in China. So the obvious question changes. It's not, why don't we mine? It's, why can't we refine? The answer to that question reveals America's true vulnerability. It reveals the three barriers, three massive industrial walls that make up the real Chinese weapon, the refining choke point. This is the core of the issue. This is the part of the supply chain that matters. The tech war is not about who has the rocks. It's about who has the factories. And when it comes to refining, China has a 90% choke point on the entire global supply. Barrier 1, the 90% dominance. The first barrier is China's absolute market dominance. This is not an exaggeration. According to data from the U.S. Geological Survey and industry reports, China controls about 90% of the global refining and processing of rare earth elements. Let that number sink in. 90%. This was not an accident. This was not a failure of capitalism. This was a deliberate 30-year industrial strategy. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, the United States was actually the world leader in rare earth refining. The technology was, in many ways, invented here. The Mountain Pass mine back then did its own refining, but the process is difficult. It is expensive, and most of all, it is dirty. To refine rare earths, you must separate 17 different elements that are chemically bonded together in the ore. This requires a complex, multi-stage industrial process called solvent extraction or hydrometallurgy. It involves hundreds of stages, washing the ore concentrate in massive vats of hydrofluoric and sulfuric acid. This process is a chemical nightmare, and it creates toxic waste. It also creates radioactive waste, primarily from the element thorium, which is naturally mixed in with the ore. In the 1990s, as environmental regulations in the US, like those from the EPA, became stronger, the cost of handling this toxic and radioactive waste became enormous. The political will to have these dirty industries in our backyard disappeared. American companies, facing high costs and public pressure, shut down. The original Mountain Pass refinery was shuttered. The expertise was lost. China, in its massive push for industrial dominance, saw an opening. They welcomed the industry with open arms and, at the time, lax environmental rules. Deng Xiaoping, the former leader of China, famously said in 1992, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." He was not talking about digging. He was talking about dominance. The West, in effect, outsourced its entire industrial dependency to China in exchange for cleaner air and cheaper electronics. China was willing to pay the environmental price. In return, it achieved a 90% monopoly. Today, if the U.S. wants to build a new refinery, it faces billions in construction costs. It faces a decade of environmental permits, studies, and lawsuits before the first shovel can even hit the ground. China, with its state-controlled system, can build a new one in 18 months. That is the first barrier, a 30-year head start and a 90% monopoly. The 3x cost barrier. The second barrier is simple economics. This is the real number that every farmer and small business owner in our audience understands. It's cost. Let's imagine the U.S. government, by some miracle, fast-tracks all the permits. Let's imagine a new state-of-the-art refinery is built in Texas or California. That new refinery would go bankrupt in less than a year. Why? Because according to industry analysis, the total cost of mining and refining rare earths in the United States is approximately 3 times higher than in China. 3 times. 300%. You cannot compete with that. Let's break down why. First, as we just discussed, are the regulatory costs. The EPA mandates for handling acid leaching and radioactive waste are strict and expensive. This is a good thing for public health, but it is a massive cost on the balance sheet. It's a cost China does not have to the same degree. Second is the cost of labor. This is a simple, straightforward calculation. Skilled chemical engineers and workers cost more in America. Third is the cost of energy. Refining is an incredibly energy-intensive process, running 24/7. But the fourth and most important factor is state subsidy. This is the part that free market defenders don't like to talk about. The rare earth industry in China is state-controlled and state-subsidized. It is considered a strategic national asset, like the military. They can set the price wherever they want. If a new American refinery, like the one MP Materials is trying to build, comes online, China can simply flood the market. They can drop the global price of rare earths by 20%, 30%, 50%, until the American competitor, which has a 3x higher cost structure, is bleeding cash and goes bankrupt. It's a classic predatory pricing model. For a private, publicly traded U.S. company, it is almost impossible to compete with a state-backed monopoly that has a 3x cost advantage. This economic reality is what keeps American investment away. No private company will risk $2 billion on a new refinery when they know their competitor can bankrupt them at will. That is the second barrier, a 3x cost advantage that makes competition impossible. The 99.9% purity wall. This is the third and most critical barrier. It's the technical barrier. If the 90% monopoly is the gun and the 3x cost is the bullet, then the 9.9% purity wall is the trigger. The data from the original transcript is the key. Let's say an American mine, like Mountain Pass, produces a rare earth concentrate. That concentrate, after initial processing, might be, for example, 92.9% pure. To the average person, 92.9% sounds pretty good. It's an A-. But in the world of high technology, it is useless. It is a failing grade. High tech, like the kind ASML in the Netherlands is building, does not run on rare earth concentrate. It runs on individual, separated elements. And those elements must have purity levels of 99.9%, 99.99%, or even 99.99%. Think of it this way. The U.S. story can mine iron ore, but China controls the only steel mills in the world that can turn that ore into surgical-grade steel. You can't build a jet engine or a medical scanner with iron ore. You need the processed, purified, surgical-grade steel. And ASML does not buy rare earths. It buys 90.9% pure cerium for polishing the ultra-precise EUV lenses. The mirrors in these machines are the flattest, most perfect objects ever created by humanity. You cannot polish them with 92.9% dirty concentrate. ASML buys 99.9% pure dysprosium and terbium to create the high-performance permanent magnets. Magnets that are essential for the machine's internal motors and magnetic levitation systems, which allow for nanoscale precision. That final, difficult, and toxic step, turning the 92.9% mixed concentrate into 99.9% separated elements, is the exact process China dominates. The purity wall is the real choke point. America has the ore, China has the surgical steel. And this is not a theory. We have the proof. The proof, case study, and conclusion. Now let's go back to the ASML crisis. It provides the perfect, real-world proof of these three barriers. Why is ASML so trapped? Why can't they just find an alternative? Why can't they buy from America? Because they already tried. The transcript shows that ASML, under pressure, tried to reduce its reliance on Chinese rare earth magnets. Here is what happened. When they tried replacing the high-purity rare earth magnets with ordinary materials, their production costs increased by 40%. This is the 3x cost barrier in action. China's materials are so cheap and efficient, any alternative is economically disastrous. But more importantly, their performance dropped by 30%. This is the 99.9% purity wall. The 30% performance drop is what happens when you don't use the high-purity, separated dysprosium and terbium. The machines simply failed to meet the advanced process requirements. The ASML case study proves the thesis. ASML is trapped. It is trapped because it cannot use the 92.9% concentrate from America. And it cannot afford to use alternatives because the 40% cost increase would destroy its business. It is 100% dependent on the 99.9% pure, 3x cheaper, refined materials that only China produces at scale. This is America's rare earth illusion. The illusion, the one told by politicians, is that mining equals independence. The reality, the one shown by the numbers, is that America is trapped by refining. We are trapped by China's 90% market dominance, a 30-year strategy. We are trapped by the 3x cost barrier, which makes competition impossible. And we are trapped by the 99.9% purity wall, which makes our raw materials useless for high tech. The ASML crisis is just the first symptom. This dependency is not just about computer chips. The same permanent magnets are required for our F-35 fighter jets. They are required for our missile guidance systems. They are required for our wind turbines. They are required for our entire green energy economy. China's 90% choke point means they can, at any time, turn off the switch for America's defense and energy sectors. And that brings us back to the real question. Knowing that it costs 3x more, knowing that it is environmentally difficult, Do you believe U.S. taxpayers should fund a domestic refining industry to compete with China? Or is it too late? Share your thoughts below. This refining dependency isn't just about ASML. It's about F-35s, wind turbines, and the entire green economy. In the next video, we investigate what happened to America's original refining industry and why it really moved to China.